Last week, CEU was very pleased to be able to host an open forum on the issues regarding the Middle East, and tonight we're especially pleased to work with our colleagues at the Open Society Archive to sponsor this exploration of the Wikileaks revolution. So it's a great privilege for us here at CEU to welcome David McCraw to our university and to this exploration of open society. Thank you, David.
Thank you, John. Basically, I came to a meeting a few minutes late, but was in progress with 5 or 6 journalists and some other journalists on the telephone in Washington. And it became clear that we had heard from The Guardian in London that they wanted to share with us a set of a set of documents from Afghanistan. They were situation reports and intelligence reports that the Department of Defense had gathered and which had been leaked to WikiLeaks and was being passed at some point to The Guardian. And The Guardian was looking to have us join in this effort, as well as Der Spiegel in Germany. And at some point in that conversation, all eyes turned to me and say, "What do you think?" I can tell you from working with journalists, you know when there's only one right answer. When they ask you that question, they're not looking for you to say, "No, this is a terrible idea, let's go back and cover traffic accidents in Queens." They're looking for you to in fact say that it seems like an idea we can work with. And that's really what I said and what I thought was that that we should get these documents. So off we went. And the thing that I want to stress is that at this point, it was really unclear what the government would do, how it would react, what sort of legal threat there may or may not be. If you think about it, sort of picture yourself in my position. I'm now advising the newspaper on should we publish this or not publish this. And the dirty secret, of course, of media lawyers is injunctions are actually much easier, right? If you get enjoined, you've gone into court, you've argued for press freedom, you lost, you can be angry at the government, you can be outraged by this intrusion on press freedom, but you know what? Nobody's going to jail. There's a court order that says you can't publish, and so you can feel angry and upset and you can rail about it. Now consider the other possibility, which is how the US law works. No injunction, but if you make a mistake, somebody's going to get arrested. And the first thing they're going to ask is, "Lawyer, why didn't you tell me that?" So that really became part of my role, was to first make people aware that, one, the Espionage Act isn't clear. It may apply to the press. Justices of the Supreme Court have said that. It does. It's never been ruled definitively. But second, and I thought this was sort of the key piece, is that there's never been a prosecution. And in talking to colleagues who've come across this and the previous times we've dealt with this issue, the thing that I always think is important is that we not take any step, that we not do anything that would make prosecution likely. Okay? Well, you don't want to create a culture around your publication where, for the first time in history, this administration is going to decide to prosecute. There were 77,000 incident reports and another 15,000 intelligence reports, so 92,000 documents. Meanwhile, we set up a tech team of reporters whose job it was to begin figuring out how to make these documents searchable, because the whole idea here was to pull out stories, not to do volume publishing, but to put these into context, to understand what they're about, to try to identify wider trends. At one point, I went down to the 5th floor of the New York Times building, which is a part of the building that the reporters normally aren't on, and there was this amazing scene of our entire staff, pretty much from Afghanistan and Pakistan, our entire reporting staff, and from Baghdad, had come home. And so you walk in and you see all these foreign correspondents sitting there with these 23-year-old geeks working their computers because they were in charge of actually doing the technical redaction. And so the reporters are there looking over their shoulder saying that should be redacted, that can come out, concerned about that. It's not popular in the age of Twitter and Facebook to stand up for good old dead tree media. Is not popular to talk about why the mainstream media is still valuable. But I think that it showed here that we did something that WikiLeaks couldn't do. Put this information into context, distill it, give it a perspective, and give it attention, call readers' attention to it. It's still a valuable thing. The problem, though, is how do you distinguish between someone like Julian Assange and the New York Times reporters for legal purposes? What is that distinction? What is that difference? So you now see this debate. Should the mainstream media essentially say, Julian Assange, citizen journalists, bloggers should be protected, and run the risk that that protection will be cut back for all of us? And that's really the risk, that as we sort of extend the protection, I think there will be a temptation by courts and by Congress to say that goes too far, and they'll bring the whole thing back. The final big lesson I would draw from this, and I hope this isn't lost, is I still believe that government secrecy remains the great threat to democracy, not the leak of government secrets. If you sort of look at this throughout the last 25 years, very hard to find leaks of government secrets that actually caused harm to people. Very hard to see. On the other hand, it is very easy to look around and see government secrecy that has covered up human rights abuses, caused unnecessary wars, and other misguided use of government power.
Leakers are part of a civic conversation, and if they are threatened with punishment and prosecuted for leaking, even if it's in public interest and might get to prison, that can dry up sources for the press as well. And if that happens in one of the great democracies like the US, then in countries like Hungary, it makes it a lot harder to argue for press freedom, because those who want to restrict press freedom just can finger point and say, look, that's democratic too.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with the idea that people who are charged with leaking should have as a defense that the disclosure was in the public interest. I mean, there are obviously leaks that are done for the wrong reason that do not advance the public interest. And I don't know of a principled way not to say that those people shouldn't be prosecuted. But I do think that leakers who leak in the public interest should enjoy a protection. And as Peter says, that's not currently the law in the United States. And I think it will be very difficult at this time to get U.S. courts or the U.S. Congress to accept that. I think that they are very concerned about leaks. And there's not really political will to change that.
As far as I know, in the Pentagon Papers report that was leaked, which was a report where U.S. diplomats discussed WikiLeaks and what kind of a threat it could mean. WikiLeaks was talked about as a journalistic outlet.
If there is a way to distinguish Julian Assange from a reporter from the New York Times, someone's going to have a very difficult time making that argument. You may get into how he got the documents, that there may be some line that was crossed there. I actually feel that rather than arguing about who's a journalist and who's not, that it's probably wiser today to talk about what is journalism and what is not, because I think that, in honesty, there's a lot of websites which sometimes are doing journalism and sometimes aren't. And when they're doing journalism, I think it's a good public policy to defend what they do in the same way we defend the mainstream media. As far as the future of, I've been asked this question a lot, and I'm glad I don't have to decide what the future is going to look like, because it's very hard to predict. I think that it's possible. I mean, someone raised in an interview I did with one of a journalist today here, made a very astute point, which is maybe the U.S. government will actually do more about freedom of information. It may, in other words, make it easier to get documents legally. And I hope that's the lesson they take away, that there is a thirst for information, there's a demand for information, and our government should be more open. And why don't they change the Freedom of Information law so it's easier to get materials? I don't think that's the lesson they're taking away. I think they're taking away the opposite lesson, which is to put up the barricades. We need to do more to be more secret.